July 19th, 1943, 1400 hours, 6 kilometers south of Prokhorovka, Soviet Union. Through the narrow vision slit of his Tiger I, Oberscharführer Ernst Becker watched the Soviet 34 materialize from the wheat field like a ghost. 800 meters. Well beyond effective range for the 34's short-barreled 76mm gun. He allowed himself a brief smile. The mathematics of the Eastern Front had been remarkably consistent for 2 years. His Tiger's 88mm Kubuk-36 could penetrate any Soviet tank at 2,000 meters. Soviet guns required point-blank range, 300 meters or less, to threaten his frontal armor. This 34 would die like the others. Target, tank, 800 meters. He called into the intercom, his voice carrying the casual confidence of a hunter who had made this shot 43 times before. Gunter Sachs, his gunner, centered the crosshairs. Before he could fire, the 34's turret swung toward them with unusual speed. The muzzle flash came first, then the crack of the gun, then the impossible sound of metal tearing through metal. The round struck their Tiger's frontal hull plate at a steep angle. Becker felt the impact through his boots, heard the screaming ricochet inside the crew compartment, smelled the acrid smoke of penetrated armor. "We're hit!" the driver screamed. "Frontal armor, how is that possible?" Becker pressed his eye back to the vision slit, mind racing through every intelligence briefing, every recognition chart, every technical manual he had memorized since 1941. The 34 looked identical to the hundreds they had faced. Same low profile, same sloped armor, same Christie suspension. But that gun. Something was different about that gun. In exactly 90 seconds, Ernst Becker and thousands of German tank crews across the Eastern Front would begin learning a truth that would shatter their understanding of armored warfare. The Soviets had quietly upgraded their standard tank gun, and the mathematics of survival had fundamentally changed. The ZiS-5, a 76mm gun with a barrel nearly half a meter longer than its predecessor, could penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The weapon that German crews had dismissed as inadequate had evolved into something lethal, and Soviet factories were installing it in every 34 rolling off production lines at Tankograd and Gorky. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of German armor supremacy on the Eastern Front had been written in the wreckage of Soviet tanks since June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa had unleashed the most modern mechanized army in history against Soviet forces, equipped with obsolete designs and outdated tactics. The German advantage seemed insurmountable, both technological and doctrinal. The panzer divisions that crashed across the Soviet border operated under a doctrine refined through campaigns in Poland, France, and the Balkans. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, combined speed, firepower, and tactical innovation in ways Soviet commanders couldn't counter. German tanks weren't just machines. They were nodes in a sophisticated system of combined arms warfare, supported by dive bombers, mechanized infantry, and artillery that moved as fast as the tanks themselves. The Panzer III and Panzer IV that formed the backbone of German armoured divisions in 1941 possessed advantages beyond their technical specifications. German crews trained for months before seeing combat, practicing coordination until each 5-man crew operated as a single organism. Radio communication linked every tank in a platoon, every platoon in a company, allowing fluid tactical responses, impossible for Soviet units that relied on flag signals and hand gestures. German optics provided another decisive edge. Zeiss rangefinders and gun sights gave German gunners clear target acquisition at ranges where Soviet crews saw only blurred shapes. A German Tiger commander could identify and engage targets at 2,000 meters, while Soviet 34 commanders struggled to spot threats beyond 800 meters. The early encounters seemed to validate German superiority absolutely. In the first 6 months of Barbarossa, the Wehrmacht destroyed over 20,000 Soviet tanks. Entire Soviet mechanized corps disappeared in encirclement battles. German crews reported destroying 5, 10, sometimes 15 Soviet tanks in single engagements without loss. The kill ratios defied belief. Some German tank battalions achieved 50-to-1 exchange rates. Soviet tank crews faced a nightmare of obsolescence in 1941. The bulk of Soviet armor consisted of light tanks, like the 26 and BT-7, with armor thin enough that German anti-tank rifles could penetrate at close range. Even the heavier 35 and KV-1 possessed guns that struggled against improved German armor. The Soviet 76mm L11 gun, standard on early 34s, could penetrate 55mm of armor at 500 meters. German Panzer IVs carried 80mm of frontal armor by 1942. The doctrinal disadvantage compounded the technical weakness. Soviet armor doctrine in 1941 emphasized massed infantry support rather than independent armored operations. Tank crews received minimal training, sometimes as little as 72 hours before combat deployment. Coordination between tanks was primitive. Communication between tank units and supporting arms barely existed. The appearance of the Tiger I in autumn 1942 seemed to permanently cement German superiority. The Tiger represented everything Soviet designers feared. Its 88mm gun could penetrate 100mm of armor at 2,000 meters. Its own frontal armor, 100mm thick and nearly vertical, rendered it immune to every standard Soviet tank and anti-tank gun at normal combat ranges. The psychological effect of the Tiger exceeded its technical capabilities. Soviet infantry reported tanks that couldn't be stopped, that shrugged off anti-tank fire that would cripple lighter German tanks. Entire Soviet rifle divisions broke and fled at reports of Tigers approaching. The NKVD documented cases of Soviet tank crews abandoning perfectly functional 34s rather than face Tigers in combat. German tankers developed an almost mystical confidence in their invulnerability. Tiger commanders like Michael Wittmann became legends, credited with over 100 Soviet tanks destroyed. The Tiger crews painted kill rings on their gun barrels, each ring representing a destroyed enemy vehicle. Some barrels displayed so many rings they appeared striped. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. A Tiger could engage Soviet tanks at ranges where return fire was impossible. Soviet tankers learned through bitter experience that frontal attacks on Tigers were suicide. The only viable tactic was maneuvering to close range, attempting to get side or rear shots on the Tiger's thinner armor. But closing from 2,000 meters to 300 meters across open steppe, while under accurate 88mm fire, was nearly impossible. Soviet tank losses reflected this brutal calculus. Reports from Kursk in July 1943 documented Soviet tank brigades losing 80% of their strength in single engagements. The 2nd Guards Tank Corps reported losing 184 of 214 tanks in 3 days of fighting. The 5th Guards Tank Army reported losing over 400 tanks in the first week of the Kursk offensive. German commanders interpreted these losses as confirmation of permanent superiority. Intelligence assessments concluded that Soviet industry couldn't produce tanks fast enough to replace combat losses. German tankers believed they were winning a war of attrition that would inevitably favor German technical excellence over Soviet mass production. What German intelligence failed to detect was a revolution occurring in Soviet weapons development. In design bureaus at Nizhny Tagil and Sverdlovsk, Soviet engineers were solving the Tiger problem through methodical technical innovation rather than dramatic new designs. They weren't building a Soviet Tiger. They were improving the 34, the tank they could mass produce at rates German industry couldn't match. The 34 of 1941 had been a revelation when it first appeared, shocking German crews with its sloped armor and wide tracks that could traverse mud and snow where German tanks bogged down. But its 76mm F-34 gun used a relatively short barrel that limited muzzle velocity and armor penetration. Against early German tanks, this was adequate. Against the Tiger, it was hopeless. Soviet engineers understood that increasing armor penetration required increasing muzzle velocity. which required a longer barrel and more powerful propellant charges. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Extend the barrel, strengthen the breech, design new ammunition with higher propellant loads. The result was the ZiS-5, a 76mm gun with a barrel length of 41.6 calibers compared to 30 calibers for the earlier F-34. The ballistic improvement was dramatic. The F-34 fired its armor-piercing round at 612 meters per second. The ZiS-5 achieved 662 meters per second with standard ammunition and 740 meters per second with improved penetrators. This 20% increase in velocity translated to nearly 50% improvement in armor penetration. The ZiS-5 could penetrate 92 millimeters of armor at 500 meters and 70 millimeters at 1,000 meters, using standard ammunition. With improved BR-354P APCR rounds, using tungsten carbide cores, penetration exceeded 100 millimeters at 1,000 meters. These numbers meant the upgraded 34 could threaten Tiger frontal armor at combat ranges, something German intelligence believed impossible. Soviet designers made the upgrade even more significant by maintaining the ZiS-5's physical compatibility with existing 34 turrets. Factories could install the new gun without major modifications to the tank's basic design. This meant production rates could remain high, while capability improved dramatically. Tank No. 112 plant at Gorky began installing ZiS-5 guns in 34s in January 1943. The security surrounding the upgrade was extraordinary. Soviet authorities classified the ZiS-5 as top secret. Factory workers signed documents threatening execution for discussing the new gun. Tank crews received training in remote areas away from German reconnaissance. When upgraded 34s first deployed to frontline units in spring 1943, crews received strict orders to avoid unnecessary engagements until major offensive operations began. German intelligence completely missed the upgrade. Captured 34s, examined in repair facilities, all had the shorter F-34 gun. Interrogated Soviet tankers either didn't know about the ZiS-5 or successfully concealed their knowledge. German technical intelligence believed Soviet 76mm guns remained inadequate against heavy German armor. This intelligence failure created catastrophic overconfidence. German tank commanders planned defensive positions, assuming they could engage Soviet tanks at maximum range without meaningful return fire. Tiger and Panther crews positioned themselves on commanding terrain, confident they could destroy approaching Soviet armor long before it posed a threat. The tactics that had worked for 2 years would lead them into ambushes they never anticipated. The Third Battle of Kharkov in February through March 1943 had reinforced German confidence. Manstein's brilliant counterattack destroyed multiple Soviet tank corps using classic German tactics. Tigers engaged at maximum range, while Panzer IVs and assault guns maneuvered for flank shots. Soviet tanks burned across the frozen steppe, unable to effectively return fire. German crews counted their victories and prepared for summer operations, confident the pattern would continue. May 1943 brought reports of unusual Soviet tank activity. Reconnaissance units observed 34s with longer gun barrels in areas where major Soviet troop concentrations were building. German intelligence officers examined these reports skeptically. The Soviets had experimented with various gun modifications before, usually mounting captured German weapons on Soviet chassis. These were considered improvised field modifications, not systematic upgrades. Frontline German units received no warnings about improved Soviet anti-tank capability. Intelligence briefings in June 1943, weeks before the Kursk offensive, assured tank commanders that Soviet 76mm guns remained ineffective against Tiger and Panther frontal armor beyond 500 meters. Tactical planning assumed German heavy tanks could anchor defensive positions with impunity, engaging Soviet armor at ranges where return fire posed minimal threat. July 5, 1943. The German summer offensive, Operation Citadel, crashed into Soviet defences north and south of Kursk. The largest tank battle in history was beginning, and German crews advanced confident in their technical superiority. They had faced Soviet tanks for 2 years. They knew the capabilities and limitations of every Soviet weapon, or so they believed. The northern pincer of the German offensive, 9th Army under model, immediately encountered unexpectedly fierce resistance. Soviet anti-tank defences were deeper and more sophisticated than intelligence had predicted. But the real shock came when German tanks engaged Soviet armour at ranges that should have favoured the attackers decisively. Hauptmann Wilhelm Ritter commanded a Tiger company in the 2nd Panzer Division. His after-action report from July 6th contained the first documented account of the new Soviet capability. Engaged enemy tanks at 1,200 metres, destroyed 3 34s with first shots as expected. 4th 34 returned fire and achieved penetrating hit on Tiger No. 213, range verified by rangefinder at 1,100 metres. Impossible by known Soviet gun capabilities. Request immediate investigation of enemy weapon type. Similar reports flooded German intelligence offices over the following days. Tiger crews reported being hit at ranges previously considered safe. Panthers with 80 mm of frontal armour reported penetrating hits at 1,000 metres. Most disturbingly, German crews couldn't identify which 34s carried the improved gun until they fired. The external differences were subtle, impossible to spot at combat ranges. July 12, 1943 brought the crisis to full visibility at Prokhorovka. The 5th Guards Tank Army, with over 800 tanks, crashed into the 2nd SS Panzer Corps in the war's largest single-day tank engagement. German crews expected another defensive victory, using superior range and firepower to devastate the Soviet attack. Instead, they discovered that Soviet tanks could now hurt them at distances that eliminated German advantage. Obersturmführer Rudolf von Ribbentrop, commanding a Tiger in the Das Reich Division, filed a report that captured German confusion. Soviet 34s engaged our Tigers from 900 to 1,200 metres and achieved multiple penetrating hits. This contradicts all technical data on Soviet 76mm gun performance. Either Soviets have developed new ammunition with dramatically improved penetration, or they have upgraded gun barrels for higher muzzle velocity. Recommend immediate investigation and revised tactical guidance. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. For 2 years, German tank crews had operated under an assumption of technological invincibility. They knew Soviet industry produced more tanks, but German tanks were better. That certainty sustained morale through terrible battles and impossible odds. Discovering that Soviet guns could now penetrate their armour at combat range shattered a fundamental pillar of German confidence. The technical reality of what German crews faced became clear only after captured 3476s, as the upgraded version was designated, reached German testing facilities in August 1943. Weapons engineers at Kummersdorf conducted systematic tests that revealed the full scope of Soviet achievement. The ZiS-5 gun represented sophisticated ballistic engineering that German experts had assumed beyond Soviet capability. The barrel's internal rifling used a progressive twist rate that stabilized projectiles more effectively than constant twist designs. The breech mechanism incorporated improvements that allowed faster reload times than the earlier F-34. Most impressively, the gun maintained accuracy at extended ranges that matched or exceeded German 75mm weapons. German test firers at Kummersdorf subjected captured ZiS-5 guns to rigorous evaluation. At 1,000 metres, firing standard Soviet BR-350A armour-piercing rounds, the gun consistently penetrated 70 to 75mm of armour plate. With BR-354P tungsten core rounds, penetration exceeded 95mm at the same range. These numbers meant that Tiger frontal armour, 100mm thick but vertical rather than sloped, was vulnerable at ranges beyond 1,000 metres, if Soviet gunners achieved hits at optimal angles. The test results triggered immediate tactical revisions. Panzer divisions received urgent directives, changing engagement protocols for Soviet tanks. Tigers and Panthers could no longer assume immunity at ranges beyond 800 meters. Defensive positions needed deeper rear areas to provide maneuver space if Soviet tanks achieved longer-range hits. Most critically, German crews lost the psychological advantage of knowing they were invulnerable at combat ranges. What made the situation worse for German forces was Soviet production capacity. While German factories struggled to produce 20 to 30 Tigers monthly, Soviet plants were installing ZiS-5 guns in 1,500 34s every month by autumn 1943. The mathematical reality was crushing. Even if German crews maintained kill ratios of 3 or 4 to 1, Soviet production could replace losses, while German losses were permanent. Oberst Hyacinth Graf Strachwitz, one of Germany's most decorated tank commanders, wrote a brutally honest assessment in September 1943. The appearance of improved Soviet tank guns represents a strategic turning point. Our technical superiority, already eroded by 34 numbers, has now been eliminated at combat ranges. We face an enemy who can hurt us at distances where we previously operated with impunity, and they possess unlimited replacement capacity, while each German tank lost is irreplaceable. Frontline German units began experiencing the psychological toll immediately. Tank commanders, who had aggressively pushed forward, now approached engagements with caution bordering on paralysis. The casual confidence that had characterized German armored operations since 1941 evaporated. Every engagement became a calculated risk rather than an expected victory. Lieutenant Hans Becker, commanding a Panzer IV in the 11th Panzer Division, kept a diary that documented the morale decline. July 19th. Lost 2 tanks today to 34 fire at ranges we considered safe. Crews are shaken. We used to joke about Soviet guns bouncing off our armor. No one is joking now. August 3rd. Another Panzer destroyed at 1,000 meters. Crew survived, but Heinrich has lost his nerve completely. Refuses to advance beyond defensive positions. Can't blame him. The tactical adjustments German units attempted revealed how deeply the ZiS-5 capability disrupted established doctrine. Pre-Kursk tactics emphasized aggressive forward positioning, using superior optics and guns to engage Soviet tanks at maximum range. Post-Kursk, German crews sought terrain that provided cover and concealment, avoiding open approaches where Soviet tanks might engage at extended ranges. This defensive mindset contradicted fundamental German armor doctrine. Blitzkrieg required speed and aggressive maneuver. Defensive positioning surrendered initiative to Soviet forces who could mass armor at chosen points and overwhelm German positions through sheer numbers. The improved Soviet guns forced German commanders into a tactical dilemma with no good solution. Soviet tactical doctrine evolved to exploit the ZiS-5's capabilities systematically. Tank commanders received training emphasizing engagement at 800 to 1,200 meters, ranges where the improved gun was effective. But German return fire remained dangerous. This forced German tanks to either close to decisive range, where Soviet numerical superiority could overwhelm them, or withdraw, surrendering terrain without fighting. The Battle of Brody in July 1944 demonstrated how completely Soviet tactics had evolved. The First Ukrainian Front concentrated over 1,600 tanks against German defensive positions in western Ukraine. Unlike earlier Soviet offensives that relied on close-range mass attacks, Soviet tank brigades engaged German positions from extended ranges, using their improved guns to suppress German defenders while follow-on echelons maneuvered for flanking attacks. Oberst Dietrich von Saucken, commanding Panzer Regiment 4, filed an after-action report that captured German frustration. Enemy 34s engaged from 1,000 to 1,500 meters, maintaining fire while maneuvering. Our Tigers destroyed multiple enemy tanks, but could not prevent enemy breakthrough due to overwhelming numbers and effective long-range fire. This engagement pattern represents fundamental change from previous Soviet tactics that relied on close-range mass assault. German intelligence belatedly recognized that the ZiS-5 upgrade was part of broader Soviet weapons modernization. The same longer 76mm gun appeared on Su-76 assault guns and in towed anti-tank configurations. Soviet forces were systematically upgrading their entire anti-armor arsenal, creating a defensive network that could threaten German armor at previously safe ranges. By autumn 1944, Soviet production of 3476s exceeded 2,000 units monthly. Tank factories at Nizhny Tagil, Chelyabinsk, and Gorky operated around the clock. The production miracle that Stalin had demanded in 1941 now delivered upgraded tanks faster than Soviet forces could absorb them. Tank armies that had been decimated at Kursk were rebuilt with 3476s within months. German tank crews increasingly reported encounters with what they called long-gun 34s, dominating their after-action reports. The phrase itself revealed psychological impact. German soldiers didn't use technical designations, they used descriptive terms that emphasized the threat. Every 34 was now potentially a long-gun variant capable of killing Tigers at combat range. The impact on German defensive operations was catastrophic. Traditional German tactics for defending against Soviet tank attacks relied on creating killing zones where German guns could engage approaching Soviet armor at maximum range. Panthers and Tigers positioned on commanding terrain could destroy Soviet tanks approaching across open ground before they closed to threatening range. The ZiS-5 eliminated this advantage completely. At the Vistula-Oder offensive in January 1945, Soviet forces demonstrated the full maturation of tactics, exploiting improved tank guns. The First Belarusian and First Ukrainian fronts, with over 6,000 tanks including thousands of 3476s, crashed through German defences in Poland. Soviet tank brigades no longer charged German positions in desperate close-range assaults. They engaged methodically at ranges where their guns were effective, suppressing German defensive positions while infantry and assault guns closed for final assault. German commanders watched their defensive doctrine collapse. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Troops, wrote to Hitler in February 1945 describing the crisis. Soviet tank forces have achieved technical parity with German armor while maintaining overwhelming numerical superiority. The improved 76mm gun gives 34's effective capability against our heavy tanks at combat ranges. Combined with Soviet willingness to accept losses, this represents an unsolvable tactical problem. Individual German tank aces still achieved remarkable kill counts in the war's final months, but their victories had no strategic impact. Oberst Kurt Knispel, credited with 168 tank kills, the highest total of any German tank ace, continued destroying Soviet tanks until his death in April 1945. But for every tank he destroyed, Soviet factories produced 10 more. The mathematics of attrition had become absolutely unsustainable for German forces. The psychological burden on German tank crews intensified as the war entered its final phase. Men who had entered service, confident in German technological superiority, now fought knowing each engagement could be their last. The casual arrogance that had characterized German tankers in 1941 and 42 had been replaced by fatalistic determination or outright despair. Unteroffizier Ernst Becker, whose Tiger had been penetrated at Prokhorovka in July 1943, survived until January 1945. His final diary entry, recovered after his death near Kustrin, revealed the complete transformation of German tanker psychology. January 7th. We face another Soviet attack tomorrow. Intelligence says 3 tank brigades, 600 34s. We have 8 Tigers and 12 Panthers. The math is simple. We will destroy many of them. They will destroy all of us. The Ivans learned to build guns that can hurt us, and they can build them faster than we can die. Soviet tankers, for their part, developed profound respect for the ZiS-5's capabilities while understanding its limitations. The gun gave them fighting chance against German heavy armor, but it wasn't a miracle weapon. Accurate fire at 1,000 meters required skilled gunners, good optics, and favorable conditions. Many Soviet crews still preferred closing to 500 meters, where penetration was certain, rather than risking long-range shots that might alert German crews without achieving kills. Guards Lieutenant Ivan Yakubovsky, commanding a 3476 in the 3rd Guards Tank Army, described the psychological transformation the improved gun created. Before the long gun, we attacked Tigers knowing we would lose 3 or 4 tanks for each Tiger destroyed. After the upgrade, we could engage Tigers at ranges where we had realistic chance of survival. This changed everything. We were no longer sacrificing ourselves. We were fighting with real hope of winning. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The technical evolution continued even as the war entered its final months. Soviet designers developed improved ammunition for the ZiS-5 that further increased penetration. The BR-367P round, introduced in late 1944, used improved tungsten carbide penetrators that achieved 110 mm of penetration at 1,000 meters. This made the 3476 capable of threatening even King Tiger frontal armor at combat ranges, something German crews had believed impossible. German responses to the Soviet gun upgrade revealed the fundamental limitations of German war production. Engineers at Warproof 6, the Weapons Testing Directorate, developed various improved armor schemes and gun upgrades for existing German tanks. But translating designs into production proved impossible. German industry, devastated by Allied bombing and desperately short of strategic materials, couldn't implement improvements fast enough to matter. The Panther OSF, with improved turret armor and better gun mantlet design, existed only in prototypes when the war ended. The E-series tanks, which might have restored German technical superiority, never progressed beyond design studies and mock-ups. German engineering excellence produced solutions that German industry couldn't manufacture in meaningful quantities. Soviet production, by contrast, accelerated throughout 1944 and into 1945. The ZiS-5 installation became so standardized that factory workers could complete the upgrade in hours. 3476s rolled off production lines at rates exceeding 1,500 monthly by early 1945. The industrial base that Stalin had relocated beyond the Urals in 1941 now delivered weapons that matched German quality while vastly exceeding German quantity. The final German tank battles on the Eastern Front demonstrated how completely the tactical situation had reversed. At the Battle of Berlin in April 1945, German tank crews fought from prepared positions in urban terrain that should have favored defensive operations. But Soviet tank brigades, equipped overwhelmingly with 3476s, engaged German positions at ranges where their guns were effective, while Soviet infantry and assault guns closed from multiple directions. SS Hauptsturmführer Rudolf von Ribbentrop, who had first reported encountering improved Soviet guns at Kursk, commanded a scratch unit of Tigers and Panthers in Berlin's final defense. His last radio transmission on April 27th captured the complete reversal of 1941's confident advance. Enemy 34s engaging from all directions at 800 to 1,000 meters. Our guns are still superior, but we are overwhelmed by numbers and cannot maneuver in rubble. The Ivans learned to hurt us, and now they've come to finish what they started. The statistical record of the Eastern Front reveals the ZiS-5's strategic impact through brutal mathematics. Soviet tank losses declined markedly after mid-1943, even as engagement frequency increased. German kill ratios, which had exceeded 10-1 in 1941, fell to 3-1 by 1944 and approached 1-1 by early 1945. This wasn't because German crews became less skilled, but because Soviet tanks could now fight effectively at combat ranges. German tank losses accelerated, catastrophically. The Wehrmacht lost approximately 6,000 armoured fighting vehicles on the Eastern Front in 1944, and over 3,000 in the first 4 months of 1945. Replacement production couldn't approach these loss rates. By April 1945, German armoured divisions existed mostly on paper, with actual tank strength often reduced to single digits. Soviet production delivered over 25,000 3476s between 1943 and war's end. This single tank variant exceeded Germany's total production of all tank types during the same period. The industrial disparity that German planners had dismissed in 1941 now manifested in overwhelming material superiority, backed by technical parity. The human cost behind these statistics reveals the personal catastrophe the improved Soviet guns inflicted on German tank crews. The average life expectancy of a German tank crewman on the Eastern Front in 1945 was measured in weeks. Crews that had survived years of combat found themselves facing odds that made survival increasingly unlikely. Hauptmann Michael Wittmann, the most successful tank ace in history with 138 confirmed kills, died in August 1944 when his Tiger was destroyed near Caen in Normandy. But his death symbolized the broader fate of German armored forces. Individual skill and tactical excellence couldn't overcome industrial mathematics. For every Wittmann, Soviet factories produced dozens of upgraded 34s, crewed by adequately trained tankers, who could now threaten German heavy armor. The psychological journey of German tank crews, from confidence to despair, mirrors the broader trajectory of German fortunes on the Eastern Front. In June 1941, German tankers advanced into Soviet territory absolutely convinced of their superiority. By May 1945, survivors fought desperately against enemies who possessed both numerical superiority and technical equality. Former German tank crews, interviewed decades after the war, consistently identified the appearance of improved Soviet guns as a psychological breaking point. Lieutenant Otto Carius, who survived the war with over 150 tank kills, reflected in his memoir, "When we learned the 34s had guns that could hurt us at normal combat ranges, something broke inside us. We'd always known they outnumbered us, but we had technical superiority. Without that, we were just delaying the inevitable." Soviet veterans viewed the ZiS-5 upgrade as vindication of Soviet engineering and industrial capacity. The narrative of Soviet inferiority that German propaganda had promoted clashed with the reality of sophisticated weapons development and mass production that exceeded German capacity. Soviet tank crews took pride not just in defeating German tankers, but in defeating them with Soviet-designed weapons that matched German quality. Guards Colonel Dmitry Lavrinenko, the highest-scoring Soviet tank ace with 52 confirmed kills before his death in December 1941, never knew about the ZiS-5. But his successors, the generation of Soviet tankers who fought from Kursk to Berlin with upgraded 34s, vindicated his sacrifice. They proved Soviet tankers could match German crews when given equivalent tools. The ZiS-5's development also revealed capabilities in Soviet weapons design that Western intelligence had consistently underestimated. The upgrade wasn't a desperate improvisation or a crude copy of German technology. It represented sophisticated ballistic engineering that solved complex technical problems elegantly and efficiently. Soviet designers had created a gun that matched or exceeded German 75mm weapons, while maintaining compatibility with existing tank chassis. This engineering achievement had broader implications for post-war military development. The 34-85, which mounted an even more powerful 85mm gun, evolved directly from experience with the 76mm upgrade. The same design philosophy, improving existing successful designs rather than pursuing radical new concepts, would characterize Soviet tank development throughout the Cold War. German post-war analysis of the Eastern Front consistently identified the 34 upgrade as a critical turning point. Former German generals, writing memoirs and participating in US Army historical studies, acknowledged that Soviet technical improvements combined with overwhelming production capacity created an insurmountable challenge. General Oberst Hermann Hoth, who commanded 4th Panzer Army at Kursk, and wrote that the improved Soviet tank gun eliminated our last qualitative advantage, while their industrial superiority remained absolute. The final accounting reveals numbers that tell the story of industrial warfare, brutal logic. Soviet factories produced approximately 35,000 34-76s between 1943 and 1945. Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers and 1,347 Tiger Is during the entire war. Even combining all German tank production, medium and heavy, Soviet output of upgraded 34s alone exceeded German totals. Combat effectiveness comparisons favor Soviet forces even more dramatically. Each 34-76 cost approximately 300,000 rubles to produce, roughly $25,000 in contemporary exchange rates. A Panther cost approximately 117,000 Reichsmarks, approximately $47,000. A Tiger I cost 250,000 Reichsmarks, approximately $100,000. Soviet factories produced effective tanks at 1/4 to 1/5 the cost of comparable German vehicles. Production. Time comparisons were equally stark. Experienced Soviet factory crews could assemble a complete 34-76 in approximately 1,300 man-hours. A Panther required 55,000 man-hours. A Tiger required 300,000 man-hours. Soviet industry could produce 4 upgraded 34s in the time German factories needed to complete one Panther. These production statistics mattered because they determined force availability. German armoured divisions that lost tanks in combat often waited months for replacements. Soviet tank brigades that suffered catastrophic losses received replacement vehicles within weeks. The industrial equation made German tactical victories strategically meaningless, because every loss was permanent, while Soviet losses were temporary. The Battle of Kursk in July 1943 perfectly illustrated this dynamic. German forces destroyed approximately 1,600 Soviet tanks during the offensive. Soviet forces destroyed approximately 300 German tanks. In traditional military analysis, this represents a favorable 5-to-1 kill ratio for German forces. But within 3 months, Soviet tank strength at Kursk had been completely restored through new production. German losses were never fully replaced. The improved Soviet gun didn't just change tactical calculations, it altered the fundamental strategic equation of the Eastern Front. German commanders had based their planning on maintaining qualitative superiority that could offset Soviet numerical advantages. When that qualitative edge disappeared, the strategic situation became hopeless. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, perhaps Germany's most capable operational commander, recognized this reality by autumn 1943. In discussions with Hitler about future operations, Manstein argued that achieving military victory had become impossible once Soviet tanks could effectively engage German armor at combat ranges. His recommendation for seeking negotiated peace based on this assessment was rejected, but his analysis proved prophetically accurate. The human dimension of this technical evolution deserves recognition. Soviet weapons designers like Vasily Grabin, who led the ZiS-5 development, worked under tremendous pressure to create weapons that could match German technology. Success required not just engineering skill, but also political courage to advocate for resources and priority in a system that severely punished failure. Grabin's team completed the ZiS-5 development in approximately 8 months, from initial concept in May 1942 to production approval in January 1943. This represented remarkable engineering speed, especially considering the weapon required entirely new manufacturing tooling and revised ammunition production. The achievement matched or exceeded German weapons development timelines, while operating under wartime resource constraints that German engineers didn't face until much later. Soviet factory workers who manufactured the ZiS-5 and installed it in 34s deserve equal recognition. These men and women, many working in primitive conditions in factories beyond the Urals, maintained production rates that supplied Soviet forces with upgraded tanks in overwhelming numbers. Contemporary Soviet reports document factory workers sleeping beside their machines, working shifts that exceeded 12 hours, and maintaining production despite material shortages that would have paralyzed Western factories. The story of the ZiS-5 upgrade provides timeless insights into how wars are won and lost. Technical innovation matters, but so does industrial capacity. Training and tactics matter, but so does morale and belief in victory. Individual skill matters, but so does systemic organizational excellence. The Soviet achievement in developing and mass-producing an effective tank gun demonstrated all these factors working together. For German tank crews, the appearance of improved Soviet guns represented the shattering of illusions they had cherished since 1941. The belief in permanent technical superiority, the confidence that German engineering excellence would always prevail, the assumption that Soviets couldn't match German quality, all these beliefs died when ZiS-5 rounds began penetrating Tiger armor at combat ranges. The psychological journey from hunters to hunted occurred remarkably quickly. From July 1943, when German crews first encountered the upgraded guns at Kursk, to May 1945, when the last German tanks fought in Berlin's ruins, was less than 2 years. In that time, the Panzerwaffe transformed from confident victors to desperate survivors, largely because Soviet engineers had solved the problem of penetrating German heavy armor. The final irony was that German engineering excellence contributed to German defeat. The pursuit of perfect weapons, the Tiger and Panther and King Tiger, consumed resources that might have produced larger numbers of adequate tanks. Soviet pragmatism, improving good enough designs rather than pursuing perfection, proved strategically superior. The 34-76 wasn't the best tank of the war, but it was good enough, and there were enough of them. German tankers never knew Soviet 76mm guns could penetrate Tigers from 1,200 yards until those guns spoke at Kursk. When they did, the myth of German invincibility died. The hunters had become the hunted, and the mathematics of industrial warfare had rendered their technical excellence strategically meaningless. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.